Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy roundtable, fantasy roundtable, yeah. Fantasy roundtable, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy roundtable, fantasy roundtable, woo. Fantasy roundtable, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Apparently I dropped myself out.
Oh, I thought it was me freezing up.
Apparently I dropped myself out.
Music stopped.
It was good work by me. I was wondering, why am I looking at just one big face? But that is, that's on par with the rest of week 15. It was a good opening that I gave to myself. But welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. Dennis, how are you doing today?
It's getting cold here. We're in the final sprint to the Christmas holiday. We just did inventory of the kids' toys or kids' presents. They're 12 and 17 now. It's not so much toys. But we did a final inventory so my wife could determine what else we needed to still buy. She was pretty happy. She was within $25 or so of what we spent on each kid and the same number of gifts. And so, that's kind of how she does it and what makes her feel good. So,
well, and I'm sure there's some people out there hoping for a gift tonight from players in either the Rams or the Packers that might propel them on in the fantasy playoffs. And you might need it because not everything we saw in week 15 went according to plan. And that starts with the first game of the week, which, boy, plenty to talk about as the Indianapolis Colts built a 33-0 halftime lead, only to lose 39-36 to the Minnesota Vikings. What a wild way to start the game, but also wild, especially for fantasy players, is the fact that Jonathan Taylor was injured on his first play and knocked out for the rest of the game, possibly for the rest of the fantasy playoffs. Dennis, what does that mean to those who roster Taylor?
They're saying not possibly the rest of the season, but likely the rest of the season. He's he kind of hasn't had a great season from a fantasy perspective. Anyways, let's see. He was sitting at oops, I wonder how I had my that's just weeks 10 to 15. I feel like he was like in the 20s on the season. Let's see how accurate I was. Running back 26 on the season. He had some injuries. The team wasn't playing well. They had the Sam Ellinger experience. I still think Taylor is that dude, but he's been playing banged up. He's hurt his ankle already once this season. I was just working on kind of my way too early startup rankings. I put out the quarterbacks last week over at Dynasty Nerds, and I'm doing the running backs. Should be out within the next couple days. I still have Jonathan Taylor as my RB1. I know Brees Hall came into the league last year. Bijan Robinson's coming in this year. Jonathan Taylor's still just 23 years old or 24 years old.
He turns 24 this week, I think, or next month.
Yeah, I think he's in great shape. He'll bounce back just fine next year. As for this season, I was really surprised with the amount of run that Zach Moss got, considering how well Deion Jackson had filled in the past. Jackson had an okay game. He caught a touchdown pass, ran for okay yardage, but Moss got the bulk of it. I feel like going forward, they'll split the carries fairly evenly with Jackson getting the receiving work. So I still lean towards Jackson as the back I want to roster. And that, I'll be honest, that could very well be implicit bias because I roster Jackson in a couple spots and I don't roster Moss anywhere. So that could very well be what's causing that.
Well, Moss gets a chance to kind of show his worth and what he can do. A good shot after the trade. Personally, I think if you're trying to replace Taylor's production and you survived this week of the playoffs and even making the playoffs, I would probably be trying to get the replacement on a team other than the Colts because I don't know that you're getting elite production from either Moss or Jackson.
So the play for me, though, is if I'm not in the playoffs and I've got a good running back that's maybe, the next tier down from Taylor, and the Taylor manager had a bye this week or won their match this week, I'm trying to buy low on Taylor and help that person win. Like I got rejected. I might resend the offer because I sent Ramondre Stevenson for Jonathan Taylor. I expected it would get rejected, but Stevenson had a great game this week.
So having a better season.
Yeah. And maybe as I take a look and, I might go back out there and do a little more fishing, see if I can pick up some cheapish shares of Jonathan Taylor.
On the flip side, the Vikings haven't looked incredible the last few weeks. And here, a game that you figured should be fairly winnable at home, they get shellacked in the first half, down 33-0. It's impressive that they came back to get the win, but did this game make you feel better or worse about the Vikings?
Well, it made me feel great from a fantasy standpoint, except for the fact that, KJ Osborne got all the work that should have went to Adam Thielen. I do think Osborne might have made Thielen redundant going into next year. But I don't know if it was the game plan they had in the first half and they just tried to stick it out and stick with it. The Colts, it wasn't like the Colts were making big plays or having long drives. The Colts just got lucky with some turnovers and some short fields. And so from that perspective, it was good because there was a lot of fantasy production, essentially on both sides, though mostly on Indianapolis' side, it was players nobody was starting other than Pittman and Pierce didn't do squat. But Jefferson had a good game. Thielen had a serviceable game. He did what he's kind of become, which is a red zone threat, low yardage, a couple catches, caught a touchdown. KJ Osborne knocked it out. TJ Hawkinson, I think, had a good game, pretty good game. And Dalvin Cook, 190 total yards and a touchdown. So can't beat that.
Yeah, it was good for fantasy. It was good for my Kirk Cousins call. I'm going to jump ahead to the first Sunday game with the Eagles because we have a question. But the big news, the Eagles get the 25-20 win over the Chicago Bears. The big news coming out of that is Jalen Hurts got injured. It looks like he is probably going to miss this week. Some people have wondered if he will miss multiple weeks. That is a bad sign for the Eagles and for fantasy, and that led us to this question from Blurpy. He said he has Hurts, so who should he pick up off waivers? Trying to choose between, I'm guessing, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Mike White, who actually Mike White's not likely to play this week either, they said, with a broken rib. I'm guessing it's Zach Wilson. Hopefully it's not Russell Wilson or Gardner Minshew. And I'm going to start off, I think the question for the Eagles is what would we expect? They're going against Dallas. Gardner Minshew hasn't played in a long time. Captain Jorts has been known to throw some turnovers. I'm definitely not playing Gardner Minshew. I'm not real bullish on him this week. I'm not real bullish on the Jets quarterbacks either. The one I would actually probably take is Jared Goff going against Carolina, surging toward the playoffs.
Now, the downside with Goff is that they're playing on the road. He did pull off a road win yesterday in New York, but Goff's road home splits are drastic. He's like 20 touchdowns at home, I think 3 touchdowns on the road, something like that. So there is some concern to be had there. Let's see. Next week, the Packers, where did they go?
They host the Dolphins on Christmas Day, and the 49ers host the Washington Commanders.
So, the Commanders may get Chase Young back, but their defense is playing well. 49ers are a great defense. Honestly, it's tough to go and say any one of them is the pick. I think you got to kind of look a little bit ahead. So you got Goff this week. See, who was San Fran playing again?
They are hosting the Commanders.
They're hosting the Commanders. So I almost feel like it's Brock Purdy. I know that it looks like Debo is going to be out. But I think Purdy might be the way to go. And then if we look ahead to the final week, hopefully Hurts is back in week 17. But if not, is Detroit at home? Scrolling too fast and I could miss it. They are at home, but they're against the Bears. The Bears should put up some points.
And have no defense.
Right. Goff in week 17 at home isn't a terrible spot to be in. I don't think I would. Carolina is not a very good team. Their defense is okay. So I think if I can only pick up one and I got to have them for 2 weeks, I'd probably go Goff. But if I'm able to juggle the quarterbacks a little bit, I might go Purdy this week, Goff next week.
I guess we haven't seen Purdy put up a lot of points, and I think that's the allure of Aaron Rodgers is his name, but he hasn't had 20-point games this year. And if they don't win tonight, which I think they will, but it's possible they don't, we could end up seeing Jordan Love next week. To me, it's Jared Goff, and it's not particularly close. What do you think it means for the Eagles, though, having to they need one more victory to both secure the NFC East, which they should get, but also to lock up home field advantage, because technically the Vikings are 2 games back, but they beat the Vikings head-to-head, so the Vikings would need to get ahead of them. Playing Dallas in Dallas on Christmas Eve, not an easy matchup. What would you expect from Gardner Minshew?
Minshew's kind of like Baker Mayfield in that, often that first breath of him is like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. He's doing wild stuff and it's working out. So I do think there's a chance that Minshew may make some plays. Now, on the plus side, Minshew has A.J. Brown, and they should have Dallas Goedert back next week. He was almost they designated him to return, but didn't activate him. And then they've got Devontae Smith. And with Minshew back there, that bodes well for Miles Sanders. Now, Dallas has a pretty tough defense, but they've given up points. They gave up 34 points to Jacksonville. They gave up points to the Houston Texans, who we all think is probably the worst offense in the NFL. So it seems like Dallas is kind of fading a little bit on defense for whatever reason. And Minshew, being in a stable situation isn't necessarily the worst thing to happen for him. And if he knows starting today, he's the quarterback all week. He's taking the first team reps. He's going to have the game plan in hand. We've seen Minshew play well before. He just kind of has a tendency to go off track at some point. So I'm not terribly concerned that they won't clinch. They may not clinch this week against Dallas, but they got the Saints next week and the Giants to close out with. So even if they keep Hurts out for a couple games, I do think Minshew wins at least one more game for the Eagles. One of the final three, probably 2 of 3. And I think it's a boost for Miles Sanders to have Minshew in there.
We'll go back to the Saturday games now. The Cleveland Browns hosted the Baltimore Ravens, got the 13-3 win. Lamar Jackson missed another game, and the Ravens offense continues to struggle without him. They did get 125 yards rushing from J.K. Dobbins, but only mustered 3 points. They've now fallen a game behind the Bengals. If Lamar Jackson can't get back on the field, is this deja vu for the Ravens?
Yeah, I think so. I think, their wide receiver group is just without Rashad Bateman. They just don't have the horses to compete out wide. And that puts additional pressure on Mark Andrews. J.K. Dobbins has added life to that running game. Him and Gus Edwards coming back have really provided a boost there. I think that the biggest challenge is since last year, when he started 4 or 5 games, and then this year there's tape out on Huntley now, and teams know how to play him a little better. Defensive coordinators have had a lot of time to look at it, and while he has some Lamar Jackson to his game, he doesn't have the arm that Lamar has. He can't make those deep out passes or the deep ball quite as good as Lamar. He doesn't have the athletic ability, running game that Lamar can do. So he's easier to contain, and he's got fewer weapons than he had last year. I like Huntley as a backup, but let's not kid ourselves. He's a backup.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. And the Ravens, they need to do something to address their offensive weapons in the offseason. And it's going to be a big question what happens with Lamar Jackson too, whether they franchise tag him or figure out a way to get it done. On the flip side, the Browns now 6-8. They aren't totally out of the playoff race. What have you thought of this team since Watson has returned?
They've played generally conservative. They did again 99 yards rushing. I think they had 28 pass attempts and 33 rush attempts. Very balanced game. It's going to take time. He's shaken off 2 years of rust. He's got developing a good connection with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Amari Cooper, but Cooper was banged up a little bit coming into this week. The accuracy and stuff isn't quite there yet. I think he's going to be fine. It's just going to take some time. He's in training camp after being out all season is kind of how I look at it. We talk a lot now about so many stars don't play in preseason, that the first 3 or 4 games of the year are really training camp. Well, Watson didn't play a ton in training camp, and then he ended up sitting out the 11 games to come until he came back, or 13 games until he came back. And, now he's having his training camp in weeks, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I think he's going to be fine, but I don't have high hopes for this year. And while they're not mathematically eliminated.
Yeah, but I think a good closing stretch could go a long way toward building momentum for the future.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said,
it helps Stefanski too.
Yeah, and
there's some sabers rattling in Cleveland for Stefanski.
They have a little bit more of a winnable stretch in the back 3 games after having cleared the 2 they did. So I'll be curious to see how they do. On to what was probably the best game of Saturday. We didn't get as much lake effect snow early in the game as we expected. It did kind of come on late, but the Bills hold on for a 32-29 win over the Miami Dolphins. Dennis, I've been harping about the Dolphins and their running game for a couple of weeks. It seems like they heard me. Raheem Mostert got 136 yards on 17 totes. Salvan Ahmed, playing for Jeff Wilson, got 43 and a touchdown on 6 carries. They didn't get the win, but did this improved running game bode well for the Dolphins going forward?
Well, I think, they only ran it, 8 times the week before. And so there was going to be some kind of course correction for that anyways. And the Bills are kind of middle of the pack versus the run. If they don't get big leads and force teams to throw, they might be even worse against the run. So I think that Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, Salvan Ahmed, not superstar running backs. It's a good system, and they were able. The game was close enough. They ran the ball a sufficient number of times against a defense that is pretty much just average against the run. So I think a lot of it will come down to how does Miami match up with whoever their opponent is as to what we can expect out of the running game. The offense is it's a pass-first offense. They run, I think, they pass to set up the run. And they've got, it's shorter passes and timing. They take some deep shots, but it's shorter passes and timing passes is what, they used to say in San Francisco and Montana there that, those short passes were just an extension of the running game. And when you've got guys like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, it kind of works out a little bit the same.
On the flip side, we saw the Bills kind of come back to win there. Toward the end of the game, Josh Allen got hit on that sore elbow, fumbled at that point in time and turned the ball over. When they came out of that, it seemed like they were a very run-heavy offense, whether it was Allen running the ball, and I don't know if you noticed a couple of times when he got hit there at the end, he also ended up having trouble holding on to the ball and dropping it after getting hit on that arm. Didn't have as many throws. It was hard to tell if it was the weather, the end of the game, or that arm, but that's going to be a lingering concern probably for Buffalo. How much should it impact fantasy players?
Well, if you have Josh Allen, you're going to start him. And if he's playing, you got to ride with him, in part because he's such a threat in the run game. He's got a great arm, and, we've seen quarterbacks before kind of have to change what they do. And the Bills have the weapons with Knox and Diggs, Davis, McKenzie, Singletary, and Cook to operate efficiently in a short passing game if they need to. So I'm not overly concerned. I think we'll have to kind of keep an eye on it, see what happens. If he misses time, then it's a whole new ball game. But as long as he's out there, we'll probably expect to see him limited this week in practice most of the week, maybe a full by Friday. But I don't know that unless I start to hear rumblings that he's not going to play. You're still firing up Stephon Diggs. You're still firing up Josh Allen. And, in a Hail Mary, you'll throw Gabe Davis or Isaiah McKenzie out there.
We'll move on to the New York Jets, who hosted the Detroit Lions and fell 20-17. The Lions now 7-7, 6-1 over their last 7 games. How do you feel about them as a potential contender?
One pride, baby. One pride. We're biting kneecaps. We're going after it. They're playing hard for Dan Campbell. They're getting things done, and it's exciting for me as a Lions fan. The defense has really started to gel together. What was it in week 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there? They canned their defensive backs coach.
Yeah.
And the team is just playing better, and Aiden Hutchinson's playing well, and Alex Anzalone's playing well. It's a really exciting time to be a Lions fan. I think they're, if they can keep it going like it is, I think they can make the playoffs. But it's going to be close. If they make it, they're probably the 7th team in.
On the flip side for the Jets, they didn't get the win, but Zach Wilson actually looked okay in the start, got 317 passing yards, a season high, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Do you feel better or worse about Zach Wilson after this week?
I haven't seen much of the game. I saw some highlights and stuff. Two touchdown passes to CJ Uzama. But man, he barely completed 50% of his passes. And he's got to be more efficient than that. So there's still some of that. I don't know if it's indecision. I don't know if it's panic. I don't know if it's recklessness. He's still got that going in his game. And, he may very well turn into a Jared Goff kind of quarterback that ends up being, if he's not clean in the pocket, it could be a complete train wreck. But if you can keep him clean, he can make the throws. So I think we'll have to wait and see what they do with the offensive line. 9 targets to Wilson was good. 7 targets to Moore was good. But they didn't get much out of the running game against Detroit. So I'd like to see him be more efficient, getting that 65% completion range with that, 300 plus yards.
On to Carolina, where the Panthers hosted the Steelers and came away with a 24-16 loss. Dennis, Deontay Johnson may not like Mitch Trubisky, but the last 2 weeks with Trubisky, we've seen an uptick in his usage. Caught 10 passes for 98 yards on Sunday. Do you still like his prospects long-term with the Steelers?
I do. I think Johnson is a very good wide receiver. He runs great routes. And, all wide receivers drop passes sometimes. I think for Johnson, he tends, he gets a little emotional, him and Pickens both, if they're not getting the ball or if they think the defense is getting an unfair advantage by holding or interfering. They can be a little bit out of pocket there when stuff like that's happening. But Deontay Johnson is a really good wide receiver. He had, 3 years of great production coming into this year, and then he's had a down year. But they also brought in a rookie quarterback who's had growing pains. They started with a recycled veteran, and now they're back to the veteran since the rookie's been injured. So there's been some adversity for him and for all of the wide receiving core. But I do think he's a very talented wide receiver, where maybe I would have thought coming into the year, top 18 maybe. It's probably right now top 30. He probably dropped somewhere in that range.
On the flip side, the Panthers came in improbably with a decent shot at making the playoffs, but they suffer kind of a home loss in what should have been a more winnable game. Their closing stretch is home against the Red Hot Lions, then at the Buccaneers and at the Saints. Still only a game out, but does this kind of end the playoff talk for you for the Panthers?
They're really going to have to play over their head if they're going to make that push for the playoffs. I don't know. They've been trying to hide Sam Darnold. Darnold has been getting the ball to DJ Moore, which is job number 1 as the Panthers quarterback. But their rush game, didn't pan out last week. Dante Foreman and his 0.9 points in the Scott Fish Bowl was one of several mediocre or below performances that knocked me out of the Fish Bowl. They're a team that's had adversity this year. Matt Rule was kind of a train wreck, quarterback roulette, lots of guys injured. It's a year where, and while Wilkes has had them playing better, and there's been some talk about is he earning the right to keep the job? I think if you look overall at Wilkes's coaching career, head coaching career, you want to see him get another chance, but is this going to be that chance? That's going to be the $64 million question.
Yeah, and it'd be curious to see how Carolina finishes. They kind of were in good position to get a top pick in a quarterback and have played themselves out of it a little bit.
Right.
On to 2 other NFC South teams. The New Orleans Saints get the 21-18 win over the Atlanta Falcons. It was the first start for Desmond Ridder, but I want to turn your attention to another rookie, Tyler Algier. 17 carries, 139 yards, and a touchdown. He's really been coming on. 743 rushing yards now on the season. Do you like his long-term prospects and fit here in Atlanta?
I mean, Tyler Algier is a classic hashtag 2 to 3 year window running back. I think he'll be the starter there next year if they decide to not bring in one of these top tier rookies. I like Algier. I think he's a good running back. I'd be a lot happier if I had started him over Deontay Foreman in the Scott Fish Bowl, because I do roster Tyler Algier, and that probably would have gotten me over the cut line. But yeah, so yes, I'm whining. I get it. I understand. I like Algier a lot. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's got good size. While he doesn't necessarily have the long speed, you don't really. That's kind of overrated in running backs. There isn't a lot of 75-yard runs from the running back position, frankly, and it's not because other guys aren't fast either. But I like Algier. I think it's a situation where, depending on what they do with their quarterback position, Desmond Ridder did not look great in his first start. So if they make a decision that they're going to go out and grab one of these top tier quarterbacks, or, bring in even one of the second tier quarterbacks, I feel like then Algier will get the opportunity to be there for the next couple of years. And then they'll bring in another running back as he's finishing up his rookie contract. But he's not, he isn't an elite running back. He isn't a Saquon Barkley. He isn't a young Zeke Elliott. He isn't a Bijan Robinson. He's a good running back. Could be very productive for fantasy if he gets a consistent. If he could get 17 carries every game, I think he'd be a top 20 running back.
On the flip side, we saw Juwan Johnson with another solid game, gets 2 touchdown receptions. He's now got 35 receptions, 416 yards, and 7 touchdowns so far this season. Do you like him long term?
I do. He's one of those guys in the same category as Chigo Okonkwo. Not necessarily the size you're looking for at the tight end position. They're both about 6'2", 240, 245, but they're super athletic, got good speed. And so they're perfect receiving tight ends. I like Juwan Johnson a lot. And early this year, there's been a little bit of comparison of him and Marcus Colston. I don't think that's necessarily an accurate comparison. I think Colston was more of a wide receiver than Johnson is. Johnson is more of a tight end. But I like Juwan Johnson a lot. He's a guy that, if I can go out and get him, acquire him to put in my tight end room, he's one of the guys I want if I don't have one of the elite tight ends. When I've got 2 or 3, if I'm looking at 2 or 3 guys from that big fat second tier, he's one of those guys I want to have because of his athletic ability.
We'll move on to Houston, where the Texans put a scare into another double-digit win team this week, holding the Chiefs all the way to overtime before the Chiefs get the 30-24 victory. Dennis, it was another huge week for Jerick McKinnon. 8 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Had 10 carries, 52 yards, and the deciding touchdown. Is he a guy that needs to be in your lineup for the fantasy playoffs?
I'm torn. He's basically RB1 for the last 2 weeks. But he was leading up to that. I thought I put it in here, but I must not have. He was, RB like 47 or something, weeks 1 through 13. And while it's exciting what he's doing, Isaiah Pacheco is their running back. McKinnon is their passing back. And he's being productive. Now they're a pass first team, so he's going to get opportunities in the passing game. It's like, but how much can you count on him breaking off those long plays? That's really the thing. I think he's a flex worthy play, but I certainly don't want to stick him in my lineup as my RB1 or my RB2, because I feel like there's a pretty long history. Not just this year, but previous seasons, of him getting real good opportunities and not always delivering.
On the flip side, another week and another close contest for the Texans. Is the 2 QB system working better than you thought?
I mean, yeah, if close calls are your thing.
It's
I
better
mean,
than what they were doing.
So Mills played 83% of the snaps to Driscoll's 29%, which is a far cry from last week's 50-50. Mills actually outrushed Driscoll this week and scored a rushing touchdown, but neither one of them completed more than 50% of their passes, and Driscoll only threw 4 passes. I think it's goofy. I don't think it's a recipe for success. The Browns actually did it. They brought in Jacoby Brissett this week for a play, but it was it wasn't we're going to trick them. They literally said, well, we've got one quarterback that's 6'2" and 210, and we've got another one that's 6'2" and 240, and it's 4th down, and we're going to run a quarterback sneak. Let's use the 240-pound quarterback. And Brissett picked up 2 yards. The way the Texans are doing it, though, it reminds me so much of when the Buckeyes had Joe Germain and Stanley Jackson, and it just, I just keep thinking about, if you've got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any quarterbacks, and I think I don't think Driscoll is the answer. I think they should go ahead and just let Mills ride it out the rest of the season. Kyle Allen isn't the answer. Driscoll's not the answer. And Mills is a career backup. Let him ride it out. You'll get Bryce Young next year. Start him. Their 2 offensive tackles are two of the top in the league, and Laramie Tunsil and Titus Bowser. Titus somebody. But so they've got some pieces. I think Damian Pierce coming back next year healthy, adding a wide receiver. Nico Collins has kind of popped up a little bit. They've got some pieces. Whether they decide to build on offense first or defense first, or try to build both of them, I don't know. I feel like, to me, I look at it and go, well, let me build this offense, and we'll win some games just by outscoring people. And then the next year, draft a whole bunch of defensive players, and then year 3, now we'll try to put it all together and see if we can get both sides to gel. I'm not a fan of the 2 QB thing, though.
Yeah, I think actually they probably shouldn't even be trying to win, because they should be getting up in the draft order. Maybe they should be playing Kyle Allen. On to Jacksonville, where the Cowboys came in and lost 40-34. The Cowboys had a 27-10 lead and allowed Jacksonville to come back in a huge way to end the game. I know a lot was made of Dak Prescott's tipped interception that actually ended the game in overtime, but was this more about turnovers on offense or some sloppy defense for the Cowboys?
The defense can't give up 34 points for Dallas. That's a challenge there. Dallas is poor versus the run, and they gave up 4 touchdown passes. Last year, I was all about Diggs isn't a great cornerback, even though he had a ton of interceptions, because NFL quarterbacks were looking at him and going, yeah, he might get one, but I think I can beat him, X amount of times, which is fine. And he's been playing a lot better early this year. But I think the pass defense has kind of fallen off a little bit. Dallas's offense put up 34 points. The defense has to be able to keep them in the game. Dak completed 76% of his passes for over 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think the defense is the one. Even though Dak had the interception that ended the game, Jacksonville pays their guys too. So I don't think this is necessarily on Dak.
Meanwhile, the Jaguars are 4-2 over their last 6. They're now 6-8, only a game behind the Titans, who they beat last week. Their closing schedule is at the Jets on Thursday night, then at Houston, and home for the Tennessee Titans in a rematch. Only a game back. How do you feel about the Jaguars' chances?
Man, we could. I think we're looking at the Titans and Jaguars getting flexed into Sunday night in Week 18 for the division crown and who goes to the playoffs. That's what it looks like we're heading towards. Jacksonville got hot at the right time. Zay Jones is playing out of his mind. Travis Etienne had a hell of a game, rushing for 102 yards or something.
Yeah.
He had a heck of a game. Christian Kirk's playing well, Marvin Jones playing well, Evan Ingram is playing well, but most of all, Trevor Lawrence is playing well. And that's what you need is you need to have the team gel and come together. The Jaguars defense can't give up 34 points either and expect to, be in every game. But they're getting hot at the right time. And if you're scoring 34 points, that's also good for fantasy.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun ride down to the end. Who would have thought perhaps the Jaguars on the final Sunday night game of the week? The next game, the Broncos managed to get the 24-15 win over Arizona Cardinals. I don't want to languish on this game too long, but the Cardinals officially eliminated now. What do you think happens to Cliff Kingsbury?
I think he goes to Bama as the offensive coordinator to rehab his image. I mean, it's as plausible as anything. I think, it's a weird situation in Arizona with Steve Keim stepping away. Their fired offensive line coach basically claiming mistaken identity for groping a lady down in Mexico City. It almost seems like with Keim stepping away that it's like, hey, it wasn't me, it was this other bald guy on our team. So that's a weird situation to keep an eye on. They're not going to get rid of Kyler. They're just not. So I think Cliff is coming to the end of his run here. There's going to be some openings next year, and for better or worse, I think he's going to be a candidate for them if he gets let go. I joke about going to Alabama and rehabbing his image. I don't know. I don't think that that's what he would do. I think if he goes back to college, he goes back as a head coach. But I mean, by and large, Kingsbury has been a mediocre head coach. But we could also, as I'm talking through all of this, it wouldn't surprise me. I think Mississippi named the defensive coordinator their head coach, giving him a contract. I would have thought, as a Leach protege, maybe he could go there, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's probably done too. I'm going to move on to the next game, which also isn't worth dwelling on too much, but the Las Vegas Raiders get the 30-24 win over the New England Patriots.
You don't want to talk about the Broncos at all?
I mean, I don't want to keep going super long, and there's nothing worth talking about. It's fair to say I've never seen a game end the way the Raiders-Patriots game ended. What do you think the Patriots were thinking on that blown play at the end? And what do you think Bill Belichick is thinking now that he has been knocked out of the current playoff standings?
Well, the fact that we're in week 15 and this Matt Patricia-led offense was still in the playoff hunt by itself is a miracle. I mean, the three guys involved in the play have all fallen on the sword. Stevenson come out and said it was just supposed to be a normal draw play. And I think he just picked up so many yards, he freaked out and saw Jacoby Myers behind him. And then Myers freaked out because he got the ball. And then he's like, oh, I see Mac over there. And then Mac was like, I got to do a better job tackling. Mac, you're an unathletic quarterback. I don't think anybody expects you to tackle Chandler Jones picking up a full head of steam. But they all fell on the sword for him, and I think they'll catch hell in practice. Wouldn't surprise me if they're all three running extra laps this week. But Bill is going to keep it in-house. We're probably not going to hear much about it. He'll get asked about it, and he's going to coach speak it and leave everybody dissatisfied with the answer because they all want to hear how he rode their ass and chewed them out, and he's not going to give anybody that satisfaction. And he's not going to bench all three of them. Literally, their best quarterback, his best wide receiver, and his best running back.
I don't know why you'd blame Mac Jones because he looked shocked the ball was coming back that way, and it was not a well-thrown ball. I mean, I could see Jacoby Meyer putting his ass on the bench, but Mac Jones was like, "Why are you doing this to me?" Did you know also? I didn't realize Josh McDaniels is now 2-0 against Bill Belichick.
Yeah, he's got the kryptonite, I guess.
Well, maybe he should only schedule games against the Patriots next year. On to the Chargers, who hosted the Tennessee Titans and came away with the 17-14 win. Dennis, we just talked about how hot the Jaguars are. The Titans, meanwhile, have lost 4 straight. They're just 7-7 now. Their closing stretch is not terrible. They're at home against the Texans, which you would hope they could win. Then they have a Thursday night game at home against the Cowboys before that final week potential showdown with the Jacksonville Jaguars. How are you feeling about the Titans?
Like I said earlier when we were talking about the Jags, I think it's going to come down to week 18. I think it's going to be a battle for the division title, and whoever wins it is going to the playoffs, and the other one's going home. It'll help them immensely if they can get Treylon Burks back. I was in the Dynasty Nerds Discord every Sunday. I host a show called Office Hours where I take start-sit questions. And one of the questions this week was Nick Westbrook-Akine, or I forget even who it was, but it was the other person. And
which is good because Westbrook-Akine didn't have a reception.
Exactly. The other person was like, well, he had Westbrook-Akine and Hollywood Brown in, and he said, or I've got these other 2 guys. And I was like, play the other 2 guys. And so I got a nice hearty thank you for helping him get to the playoffs, or win round 1 of the playoffs. It's, the Titans they need. The fact that they're in it is a testament to Mike Vrabel and his coaching acumen. But they're not long for the playoffs if they do make it. I would much rather, honestly, the way Jacksonville is coming on and getting hot, I'd much rather see Jacksonville in there.
On the flip side, it was kind of an ugly game for Justin Herbert and the Chargers, but we saw Joshua Kelly has been contributing more and more each week. Got 24 yards and a rushing touchdown this week. What do you make of him in the backfield, and how does that impact Eckler?
I don't think it impacts Eckler. The tough spot for the RB2 in Los Angeles is that they're just not going to get enough work to get a rhythm with Eckler healthy. Eckler's still going to get significant playing time. He's going to be the one getting, they may be equal in carries, but Eckler's also going to be in there for basically all the passing downs. And I like Joshua Kelly, I like Isaiah Spiller. I liked Justin Jackson, but it seems like they're drafting a running back every year to be that number 2. And Kelly so far this year had been the only one performing at any sort of decent level. Spiller was like around 2 yards per carry or something. Kelly was over 4. The last couple of games, he's getting 6 to 10 touches or something, and he's not, he's not putting up big numbers. He's not fantasy relevant. If you start Joshua Kelly in fantasy, especially now, you're basically laying down. Because I don't see, he doesn't have touchdown upside. Eckler's the guy at the goal line. Eckler's the guy in the passing game. Now, the plus side of it, Eckler's 28 years old. So if Kelly can hang around long enough, or Spiller can hang around long enough, maybe the 2 of them in 2024 can form a split backfield where they're both getting about 50%. But until then, good for real football, not good for fantasy.
The Spiller thing has been interesting all year. Be curious to see if he manages to pick it up in year 2. On to Tampa Bay, where the Buccaneers raced out to a 17-0 lead and managed to lose 34-23 to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals get the win. They're out in front in the AFC North now. They still have the rematch with the Ravens that they would need to win to assure themselves of the division title. But do you feel like they're the favorites in that division right now?
I do. And I don't think it's particularly close if I'm saying favorites. I just think the Bengals have too many weapons and their defense is playing too well. Their defense is going to give up some big plays, but their offense is going to make some big plays with those receivers, running backs. Losing Hayden Hurst at tight end is merely a blip. The offensive line that they invested in the offseason is starting to come together and it's playing really well. But the key to the whole thing is Joe freaking Burrow. And, he's the reincarnation of Joe Cool. He gets it done. He makes things happen. He's got some swagger and he just isn't afraid. He's not afraid to make a mistake because he knows more often than not it's going to work out just fine. So I think that where Baltimore doesn't have the firepower to keep up, Cleveland isn't close yet this year. I think in a perfect world, if you looked weapon for weapon, Cleveland probably has the second best weapons in the division. But they're just not ready yet with the quarterback situation and the change there. Baltimore's got some good players, but they need to invest heavily in wide receivers next year. I don't know if it's free agents. I don't know if it's the draft, but they need to bring in like 4 A-list wide receivers, try to figure out, who's going to get it. I don't think they're ever going to be a high volume passing game with Lamar Jackson, but they got to be able to support at least one top 20 wide receiver along with Mark Andrews. But first they have to get a wide receiver that's worthy of being a top 20.
Or that can even stay on the field.
Brown.
On the flip side, Tampa Bay, they got out to a lead, but a lot of turnovers down the stretch. They are now 6-8, still holding on to first place by a game thanks to their woeful division. Their closing stretch is at the Arizona Cardinals, home for the Carolina Panthers, then at the Atlanta Falcons. How are we feeling about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
It's a last man standing division, and I think the Buccaneers are going to be the last man standing.
It's a battle of attrition.
It is. It is one of those things where, they've got good weapons. Otten is a serviceable tight end. Evans, Godwin are really good wide receivers. Lenny and White in the backfield, their Achilles heel, it's more like an Achilles toe because it's the front and center of their offensive line. It is, the 2 guards in the center just haven't played well since they let all 3 of them go from last year's team. And that presents an issue for Brady getting pressure up the middle. I think they're going to win the division. I think they're going to make the playoffs. And when you get in, anything can happen, especially when you have a wily veteran at quarterback like Tom Brady. Unfortunately, I think that Todd Bowles and Byron Leftwich are kind of crapping the bed.
Yeah, it's been a shockingly bad season. Shockingly bad, especially with all their weapons. The Sunday night game, we saw the New York Giants and the Washington Commanders when the Giants were sitting at 20 points and the Commanders were driving for a tie. I know we all got nervous again after their 2020 tie a couple weeks ago, but the Giants managed to hold on with a little help from their friends in the Stripes, but we will get to that in a minute. The Giants get the win. They go to 8-5-1, a very crucial win that they needed. They close at Minnesota, home for the Colts, and then at the Philadelphia Eagles. Are you feeling better about their playoff chances?
Yeah, I think they're playing well, and their ragtag group of wide receivers is starting to come together a little bit. Isaiah Hodgins is stepping up. Richie James is playing well. They're basically, though, going to go as far as Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones will carry them. I like what Bellinger's doing at tight end, and they've got a couple guys that just the wide receivers need to make timely plays. I don't think they can expect that group of wide receivers to be I don't think they can expect anybody to go off for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns in that group. But they just have to make plays when they're called on, and then keep it opened up enough that Saquon Barkley can make some plays in the running game, because he is the guy that can provide that kind of burst there. I like their odds right now. Would have been nice to maybe see the Commanders. Watching the Commanders go through their introductions, it was like, man, it's like Ohio State Buckeyes East watching those introductions.
Yeah, and they played like Ohio State Buckeyes playing the Michigan Wolverines last night.
Screw you.
Would be interesting. So I think 8-1 would almost be good enough to get into the playoffs on the NFC side. Having that tie benefits them. But if they can get that win over the Colts, I think in week 17, that will pretty well lock it up, because I think you get to 9 in the NFC and you're in pretty good shape. On the flip side, for the Commanders, we had a weird penalty that took a tying touchdown off the board, and then something akin to a mugging in the end zone on the final play that went uncalled. Did the officiating toward down the stretch really impact what Washington was doing?
So, it impacted it, but I don't think it was intentional. Whether or not the linesman was clear when McLaurin was checking, is my position okay? You see that in every game, wide receivers out there kind of pointing and checking. I saw something on Twitter today, and what it said is that the wide receiver's helmet has to be the belt line of the offensive lineman. Now, it certainly looked like it was, but camera angles and stuff are all, that somebody was saying, well, where the lineman stood, he couldn't tell. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't think that the angle wasn't that drastic. But that being said, I think McLaurin checked with him, and for it to get called a penalty was kind of shitty, because I think he felt like he had verified he was okay. He even moved up a little bit. And so that was kind of crappy. And then the play in the end zone, it was, let's just say there was some significant contact there. But I don't know, the official in the broadcast booth seemed pretty agitated about it. He's like, look, that's a penalty in the second quarter. It should be a penalty in the last minute, and it was a penalty.
Yeah.
Well, they got hosed a little bit.
Well, and now for the Commanders, they close at San Francisco, then home to Cleveland and home to Dallas. They're at 7-6-1. The tie could be beneficial, but you have Detroit's coming on. You have some other teams that are creeping up in the race. Seattle's still hanging around at 7-7. How do you feel about the Commanders' playoff chances?
They're still alive, and they play hard for Tyler Heinicke. But man, I'd sure love to see Sam Howell get in. And as long as they're this close, we're not going to see Sam Howell. So, I don't know. It is what it is. I want to see him do well. I want to see, Terry McLaurin do well, and Curtis Samuel, and Brian Robinson looked real good. Good for fantasy. Antonio Gibson, had a couple nice plays. Logan Thomas had some drops. That was, since he's come back from his injury, he used to be pretty reliable, but since he's come back from his injury, I don't think he's been quite the same, which is weird because it wasn't his hands that were injured. So
it was his spirit.
Yeah, something.
So let me ask you a question as we wrap up here. Giants, Lions, Commanders, Seahawks, Packers. Pick 2 into the playoffs.
Giants, Lions.
It's my 2 also. It's probably not a good sign. We apologize, all fans of the New York Giants and the Detroit Lions. But that's kind of how I feel it's going to. The weirdest one would be Green Bay, if after how badly they've played, if they can go on us. But if anyone could go on a stretch, it's like Aaron Rodgers' revenge tour against everyone who said Jordan Love should get a shot this season.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, tonight, Baker Mayfield versus Aaron Rodgers. Assume you're sticking with the Packers.
I am.
As am I. I'm hoping for a good game. That'll do it for today. We will be back a little bit later this week previewing all the action. Not sure if it'll be me and Matt on Wednesday, me by myself on Wednesday, but we shall see. Until then, Dennis, what should the people do while they're watching commercials tonight?
Go and rate and review. Go to that, just Google Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. Subscribe, rate, review. Helps us out a ton.
Let's just hope if I'm by myself on Wednesday, I don't